475 miles. Picture a near-continuous scar of trench from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea, cutting the continent clean in half, and for 4 years neither army could shove it more than a few miles. You already know the pop history version. A generation of generals in shiny boots feeding men into machine guns, too blinkered to imagine anything smarter. It's a great story, and it's wrong in the way that matters most. The trench itself was the best-worst idea anyone ever had, and I'll stand by that. The single deadliest thing on that battlefield wasn't the machine gun everyone pictures. By the end of this, you'll know what it actually was and why it pinned 2 whole armies in the mud for 4 straight years.
K here, and I'll say the quiet part loud. 4 years. The same 50 yards of mud. That's not strategy. That's a blunder with a body count.
Hi all, I'm May, and I want to bridge the two of you before we start, because you're both about to be a little bit right and a little bit wrong. Think of the trench like a padlock somebody invents that turns out to be unpickable. It looks senseless from the outside. From the inside, it's the only thing keeping you alive. The interesting question isn't why they built it. It's why nobody could break it.
Almost, I'd add one date because it changes the frame. This is Erica, and the trenches were not a plan anyone drew up. After the opening battles of 1914, both armies tried to outflank each other north to the sea, ran out of room, and dug in where they stopped. The line froze by that winter. Nobody chose the trench. They backed into it.
If you came here from how this war actually started, good. Take this as the sequel nobody films. Not why it began, but how it was fought, foot by muddy foot. And the number that opens it is the length itself.
Right, run the geography. 475 miles, no open ends. There's no flank to sweep around.
That is the whole trap in one sentence. Every war before this one had a side you could get around, a wing you could turn. This time the wall ran coast to mountain with no edge. So the only direction left to attack was the one that got you killed, straight ahead.
Most asked question under every video about this is dead simple, so let's put it up before we go anywhere. Why didn't they just go around? The honest answer is, there was no around. Not with a near-continuous belt of trench from Switzerland to the sea. The real fight is what happens when the only way forward is forward. Erica, start us where the killing started. What made standing up a death sentence?
Right where it should start. The generals of 1914 were trained for a war of movement, cavalry, and bayonet charges, and they marched straight into a firepower revolution that nobody's tactics had caught up to yet. Take the machine gun. A single Vickers or German MG-08 fired somewhere between 450 and 600 rounds a minute, and it never got tired, never lost its nerve. One crew, one gun could sweep an entire field of advancing men. Cross open ground toward that and you are not a soldier anymore. You are a target standing in the open.
Say the rate again. 600 rounds a minute is 10 a second out of one barrel. Nothing walking survives that.
May read as the machine gun is the villain of the story. That's the thing that made the trench necessary. Am I close?
Half close, and hold that guess, because the real villain is hiding behind it. Think of the battlefield in 1914 like a kitchen where the stove suddenly gets 10 times hotter but everyone's still reaching in with bare hands. The National World War I Museum puts the toll by the end of that first year at around 4 million dead and wounded. 4 million in months before anybody had properly dug in. That number is the argument. Open ground had become a place human bodies could not exist.
Hold on, that can't be right.
It is right, Kai. 4 million dead and wounded before a single proper trench existed. That is the number that ends the cowardice argument for good.
That's the number, and it's why the shovel wasn't cowardice. Here's the ruling on the whole first year. Faced with fire that no chest could cross, 6 feet of dirt was the only thing on earth that reliably stopped a bullet. Digging in wasn't giving up. It was the single most rational thing a soldier could do.
I'll give you that the dirt beats the bullet. I still say 4 years in the dirt is the crime.
K, the sharper version of your own complaint is the one the comments always ask. If one machine gun could do that, why did anyone climb out of the trench at all?
Because a war where nobody attacks is a war nobody wins, and generals are paid to win. Erica, you had a note on your desk about that, the one you keep uncapping your fountain pen to underline.
I do, and I caught myself underlining it twice this morning, which tells you it matters. The pressure to break the deadlock never eased. So every general spent 4 years asking the same question. How do you cross ground that kills anyone who crosses it? But before we answer that, look at what they built just to survive standing still. The trench wasn't a ditch. It was a city under the ground.
Quick honest ask while we are here. If this has been worth your time so far, hit like, then subscribe and ring the bell. I know everyone asks, but this one is free, and it is how a small channel like this actually grows. Look at a trench from the air, and the first thing that breaks your brain is that it's not a line, it wanders. It has bends every few yards, like a saw blade. And there isn't one trench, there are 3, stacked back from the enemy.
Right, and each of the 3 has a job. The front line is where the sentries and the fire steps sit, the wall you shoot over. Behind it, the support line, with the deeper dugouts where men eat and sleep. Behind that, the reserve line, holding the troops for a counterattack. And running perpendicular, linking all 3, the communication trenches, so you never have to cross open ground to move up.
Let me show them the shape, because reading it doesn't do it justice.
Fine, but why the zigzag? A straight trench is faster to dig and easier to move through. Explain the bends.
The bends are the smartest thing in the whole design, and there's an everyday shape that explains them exactly. Think of the watertight bulkheads on a ship. Each little bend in the trench, called a traverse, is a bulkhead. Each straight stretch between them is a sealed compartment. A shell that lands in one bay, or an enemy who jumps in, is trapped in that one compartment. The blast, or the bullets down the length, can't run the whole line.
Think of a second everyday version of the exact same shape, because seeing it twice makes it stick. Fire doors in a building. Same shape as the bulkhead, same shape as the traverse. You break a long, dangerous space into sealed sections so one disaster stays local instead of taking the whole structure.
Okay, but a ship's bulkhead is welded shut and a fire door latches. A trench bend is open to the sky. So what's actually being contained if the top's wide open?
Nothing. That's exactly my point.
Not nothing, and here's the catch you're both skating past. The traverse doesn't stop the blast the way a sealed hull stops water. It just limits how far the damage travels sideways. A machine gunner who captures 10 yards of your trench can't hose the next 300 yards because a wall of dirt is in the way.
That's the rule, said plainly. Build regular breaks into the line so one shell or one enemy who gets in can only wreck a single bay, never the whole trench. Same principle in a warship, a stairwell, and a mile of mud. 7 feet deep, dug in bays, 3 lines back. That settles it. This was engineering, not panic.
The bulkhead thing actually lands. I'll stop calling the digging madness. The staying, we'll get to.
Notice how close the 2 sides sat. No man's land. That strip between the front lines could be as narrow as 50 meters in places. Close enough to hear the other side cough. Close enough to throw a grenade. And yet for years, a strip no wider than a city street that no army on earth could walk across.
Remember the promise I made you up top, the deadliest thing on that battlefield? It is not the machine gun everyone pictures. Before I say it, I want to guess on the record. Kai, quick one. Which killed more men out there, machine guns or artillery?
Machine guns, obviously. That's the whole reason you can't cross the field. Lock it in.
Wrong. And it's the most important wrong answer in the whole war. Artillery, shell fire. By most counts, around 60% of all battlefield casualties came from the guns, not the bullets. The machine gun pins you in place. The artillery is what actually kills you there.
This is the piece the pop history version can't hold, so watch the full mechanism. It's the engine of the stalemate. The guns fire for days before an attack to smash the enemy wire. Then your men climb out and walk, but the barrage has warned the enemy exactly where you're coming. It churns no man's land into a moonscape you wade through slowly, in the open. Their artillery, which you never destroyed, drops onto you. Their machine guns crawl out of deep dugouts the second your shelling stops. Every tool of the attack fed the defense.
Take one real morning, because the abstraction hides how big this got. The first day of the sum, the 1st of July, 1916.
57,470 British casualties. Not across the battle, on the first morning of it. 19,000 of those men killed. It is still the bloodiest single day in the history of the British Army.
Say that day one number again.
57,470. In one morning, and that is only day one.
So what did that actually buy? Run the worth it number on the whole battle.
Watch the whole receipt, Kai. It's grim. Start with the length of the fight.
141 days. Keep going.
More than 600,000 British and French casualties for an advance of about 6 miles at the deepest point. Do the division and it lands at roughly 100,000 casualties for every single mile of ground.
All right, I walked in here calling this a colossal mistake and the numbers just changed my answer. If the machine gun pins you and the artillery kills you the second you move, then there was no clever attack sitting on the table that someone ignored. The problem was real. And a real problem is a much harder thing to sit with than blaming the men in charge.
Ditcher losa terse, indich the honest one. Not folly, a genuinely unsolved problem, with no tool yet built to solve it. The machine that would finally cross that ground didn't even exist when the war started. When it first rolled up, in 1916, it looked like this. But it came years too late for most of the men out there. So before we get to how the deadlock finally broke, go down into the trench with me. What were those 4 years actually like to live?
The rhythm of trench life is the part the movies get most wrong, and it's nothing like 4 years in one ditch.
Right, that's exactly what I pictured for years. One man in the front line for the whole war.
Not even close. So we called in someone who reads the actual letters and diaries these men left behind.
Glad to be on. The first myth to drop is endless frontline duty. Most men held the front trench only about 4 days at a stretch, 6 at the outside, then moved on.
4 days? Then where's the rest of the time going?
Rotation. A unit cycled through the front line, then back to the support line, then reserve, then out to rest billets, then round again.
That myth is wrong on every count. One man, 4 years, one trench. It never happened that way.
Exactly, and it matters more than it sounds. That rotation is a big reason more men didn't break down. But every dawn and dusk came stand to. Every soldier up on the fire step, rifle ready.
Why those two moments? What's special about dawn and dusk?
That half light is when an attack is hardest to see coming. So both sides stood ready at the same hours, staring across, mostly at nothing.
What actually filled the day? Give me the honest breakdown.
Repair, sentry duty, digging, and a great deal of waiting. The old line rings true. Long stretches of boredom cut by a few moments of pure terror.
Take a private, call him Sid, a 19-year-old volunteer 3 days into his first 4-day tour. Cold water in the trench floor around the clock. And that constant wet is what caused trench foot.
Feet in cold water for days would swell and rot. Left untreated, it turned to gangrene.
Wait, he could lose his feet?
Lose his feet, without a single shot ever being fired at him.
That's the war the pointless slaughter story skips, not heroic charges. Rot and rats and cold and the endless wet. Eleanor, before we let you go, anything you'd leave folks with?
Only that the letters home were never about glory. They were about dry socks, hot tea, and getting through the next 4 days. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Eleanor. So that's the real texture of it, mud and waiting far more than heroic charges. Which leaves the one question historians still fight over, and it's the biggest of the day. We've killed the idea that the trench was a mistake. Now the hard part, the one historians still fight over. Was that 4-year deadlock genuinely unbreakable until the tools caught up in 1918, or was there an earlier year the generals could have cracked it and didn't? Erica, make the case that it was a genuinely impossible problem for as long as it lasted.
The case is the whole video, really. Defense beat attack on every axis. The machine gun and the artillery we walked through, plus barbed wire, plus this. Once you broke into the enemy line, you outran your own telephone wires and your own guns, on foot, while the defender rushed fresh troops down intact railways behind him. The attacker always arrived exhausted and alone. Break in, yes. Break through, almost never.
It's the same shape as a kitchen at my parents' restaurant on the worst night of the year. When the whole place is slammed, one new cook doesn't fix it. You only get out when everybody moves as one machine. The guns, the timing, and the runners, all together. That is what the generals didn't have yet, and couldn't buy.
Hold that, because you just answered a different question than the one I asked. Forget whose fault it was for a second. Here's what actually matters more. What finally made it stop?
That's the ruling, and it answers inevitability too. Nobody found one wonder weapon. They learned to combine. Tanks, first rolled out in 1916, to crush the wire and cross the craters. Artillery that crept forward like a moving wall just ahead of the infantry instead of warning the enemy days early. Aircraft spotting the guns. And the Germans' own answer, small stormtroop teams infiltrating the weak points in 1918 instead of charging the whole line.
Remember Kai's old jab from way back? For 4 years, 600 rounds a minute owned that ground.
Outgunned by what, though?
It took tanks, aircraft, and a creeping wall of shellfire, all moving together, to finally answer one machine gun. The deadlock didn't break because someone got smarter overnight. It broke when the tools finally caught up to the problem.
My honest verdict, and it's the thing I'd carry out of here, it was both. There were real failures early, generals slow to learn, attacks repeated long after they had stopped working. But it was also a genuinely unsolved problem that no army had the tools for until 1918. Judging 1914 by 1918's answers is the one error worse than the generals.
That's the honest place to land it. Not fools, not geniuses. People trapped by their own weapons, learning in the most expensive classroom in history.
Remember Liam called the trench the best worst idea anyone ever had, up top. He was half right. It was the best idea available, and everyone hated that it was.
I stand by it, and I resent that you made it sound wise. Take us out. Quick recap. The trench wasn't a mistake. It was the rational answer to firepower that made open ground impossible, and the deadlock held 4 years because defense beat attack until the tools finally caught up.
The thing I can't unhear is the two numbers side by side. Around 60% of the killing came from artillery, not the gun everyone blames. That flips the story.
Mine is the worth it number. Roughly 100,000 casualties for a single mile at the sum. I walked in calling it a blunder and out calling it a trap.
And if you want how this war even started, we walked those 37 days in a companion piece. Make that your next video. It nails the one thing this episode leaves open, how a street corner assassination became a 4-year war.
If this rewired how you picture that war, subscribe and we'll keep bringing you one honest history at a time. Here's the one we genuinely could not settle. Which year was that deadlock actually breakable, or was it locked until 1918? Pick a year below and make your case. I do not know yet is a complete sentence. Use it.
Solid 9, Liam. I had to rewind a section because I was taking genuine notes. This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.